Tips from Trestle is brought to you by eMenuChoice Point of Sale and Clark Food Service Equipment. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality Podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. My goal for this podcast: educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By bringing the resident and customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Today on Tips from Trestle, I'm chatting with Dr. Krystal Cullar. Krystal is the trailblazing founder of the Virtual Brain Health Center and is on a mission to revolutionize brain care for everyone. As a doctor of behavioral health and holistic brain health expert, she brings nearly 2 decades of unparalleled expertise in working with individuals, families, providers, and advocacy organizations specializing in brain-related diagnosis. With her groundbreaking work in translation, I can't even talk. That's fine. I can cut all this out. With her groundbreaking work in translational and applied brain health science, she has garnered a collection of prestigious international and national awards. Her innovative brain health programs and services have left an indelible mark locally, internationally, and globally. Krystal, thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have a conversation with you and your audience today.
Yeah, one of the things that I've dabbled with in my career is, everybody's always asking for, well, we need healthy menu options, right? So how do we get there? How do we do that, right? And of course, everybody's like, well, we need heart healthy and we need this. And I'm just like, well, some of that stuff's like trademarked and copyrighted. So we got to come up with something on our own. And so I started exploring and investigating brain health and brain healthy diets. And so it's always something that's kind of right there that I have a curiosity about. And so once we connected and part of our founders group, I was like, I need to get Krystal on here to talk about this because it's going to be a really interesting conversation. And so, but first, let's start with brain health and senior living. Like from your perspective, where are we as an industry? Where could we be? Like, where do we stand today?
I like to think the time is now for brain health and senior living. There's some different initiatives that are starting on a small scale, or brain health is this checkbox. We've done an educational program on it, but I think the time is now. The customers we will be serving in a decade will expect that brain health and wellness programs are going to be integrated into your community. So it's not going to be the luxury or the market differentiator per se. It is going to be the expectation of people coming in to communities that their whole mind, body, spirit is going to be cared for and prioritized by where they're choosing to live. So I like to think of it as the call to action of we can't keep waiting. The time is now. And there's lots of things we can start to do today that can have an impact and then really grow out robust brain health programming for everyone that we're serving.
Yeah, I think you're right. I did an interview earlier this season. We were talking about trends in dining in senior living, and health and wellness was a big point of contention, right? It's like we're starting to get the very oldest baby boomers starting to come into senior living here in the next year or two. And you're right, their expectations and what they're looking for is completely different. And from the research and the stuff that I did on the food side, like brain health doesn't have to be hard or complicated if you're strategic and forward thinking about it. And so, in kind of that frame of mind, why should operators make this a priority, like you said, now as opposed to waiting?
I think everything that we're seeing in the brain health research is its lifestyle factors are what we have the most control over to
Mm.
either mitigate or delay our cognitive decline. Nutrition is a fundamental pillar of that, along with hydration, social connection, how you're engaging your body, how you're engaging your brain, moving throughout your environment. And so I think when we're entering into senior living, it's a transition for
Mhm.
people, but it's now their home where they're going to spend their time. And for many, that's the change. They're no longer cooking or preparing their meals. And that's something they've done for a long time with their own preferences and in
Mhm.
their own way. And is also that one we know we can have quick wins. When we are getting proper nutrition and access to good, nutritious foods, our energy changes, how we're seeking out activities changes, our mood is better. And so all of these things we are measuring in senior living in terms of outcomes or what we want to show as an outcome for health and well-being of those we're providing services for, it's going to have this trickle over effect. It's
Yeah.
very hard for nutrition to just be isolated in its own area because it impacts your entire body and brain. Your food, what's fueling you. And so I think it gives us this really wonderful opportunity to spotlight and do right by those we serve. And I'm hoping that we will hear more of that at
Yeah.
conferences rather than operators saying, here's this low cost point of what I can feed my residents for per day. And I don't know about you, but when I hear those numbers, I have to kind of lift my jaw up off the floor, think, what quality food is someone getting? If
Yeah.
that's their 3 square meals, I wouldn't want to eat it. I wouldn't recommend that for my loved one. And I
Yeah.
always feel I probably wouldn't feed it to my dogs either. So
Yeah.
how do we do better, like getting in not just what's your dietary standards, but to have good nutritious food that people want to enjoy and to honor that socialization component as well. We're social by food. So how do we create
Yeah.
those experiences? And I've always enjoyed my conversations with you because hospitality can make a huge difference today.
Yeah. No, it's funny because when I think about like just from a marketing perspective, right? Like we talk about food and the dining programs, it's a top three, like, wh- satisfier. Like it's the thing that people want to know the most about. It's where we can have, create the most flexibility and the most control for the residents as they make that transition. And it's this huge opportunity, like you said, to improve their overall lifestyle because when they're living on their own by themselves, they're probably creating really bad habits. It's just kind of something when you see and you read about, like that's a big transition opportunity. And if they're making that leap to this community where there's activities and, like-minded individuals. And so why not try and help make that transition from a healthy brain diet kind of mindset? I think it's a huge opportunity to not only from a marketing perspective, but also from kind of a quality of life perspective. So,
Well, and I think just what you highlighted there shows we're taking away the time that you would spend cooking on these meals and we're giving you this opportunity to nutritious food. And for a lot of us, if we were aging and cooking meals for just ourselves or another person, that's really hard to do, let alone multiple times a day. And so,
yeah,
like you said, that can be something that gets neglected. But what an opportunity that can create that now your time and energy that you would spend into your meal prep and your planning, your shopping can go into doing the things that bring you joy, that are fun, that are these other services your community provides. So I like to encourage that big picture of yes, there's trade-offs, but there's also this opportunity to explore now what you can do with that time and energy that was going to your meal prep. If we're taking care of that for you, giving you this nutritious option, you're coming in, enjoying your meal, leaving energized. What are you going to go do next? That
yeah.
looks very different for a lot of people. So I'm optimistic that we're going to see a lot more of that being intentionally done in our communities.
Yeah, no, and that's actually a great segue because one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was, operators sometimes struggle with, okay, I hear these brain health concepts and I hear about it almost sounds like its own separate program, right? So it's kind of like, oh, well, we got one more program thing we got to do. And like, that's just, we don't have the staff for that, or we don't have the budget for that. And we just have this struggle with it. And so I don't think that that's the case, but thinking of it maybe in that frame of mind, how can operators make this a part of their bigger community experience, right? We kind of started with the nutrition piece, but like you said, there's opportunity for more with the larger experience of the community. How do they do that? How can they make this work, like you said?
I think a lot of that's a great time to have honest conversation with your teams and departments that are part of that. Because I suspect when you're at the big picture and you're looking down, it does seem very overwhelming. But each department is respectively playing their role to the
Mhm.
health and well-being of those that you are serving. And they likely know where the quick wins are. For me, one of the first ones when I worked with the community was getting out water. that's accessible, that's appealing to the eye, and then intentionally adding water into programming that involved movement. So before exercise, the little cart came in with the water and all of the
Mhm.
nice small cups that are manageable. So we work with our
Yeah.
teams to not have ones that are very big and just visually overwhelming, and
Yeah.
using small cups that after programs, we're immediately drinking water. We're not relying on that they're going to leave and get water on their own. We're providing it in the moment. And so a lot of this came from our teams of, hey, we're already doing this, quick wins. So we bought a cart or we repurposed a cart that we already had and that became the water cart. And, just
Yeah.
thinking through where are these fast places to do that. But also when you're putting the water in the lobby that's fruit infused or with herbs and with vegetables, how everyone's hydrating and going in. The thing we learned was dietary had to fill it up more times than we initially thought. But
Yeah.
that's a good problem solve to have when people are getting properly hydrated. Your guests, your residents, people
Yeah.
coming in, the appeal to the eye. So there's small, quick wins. And then there's that bigger view of if your community is going to decide to offer brain healthy meals, you can pick one of the diets or just following healthy eating guidelines. Mind diet, Mediterranean diet, right? The top diets in the world, but very
Yeah.
similar overarching components. But giving your culinary staff the chance to, how do we get in more greens for
Yeah.
people in a meal and make it visually appealing on the plate? How do we make the colors of the rainbow pop up off the plate, and starting to do that and seeing that a lot of times it's not necessarily it's this overall expense, it's reallocating and leveraging the resources and the expertise you have within your communities. And your chefs know their food costs and their numbers. And so they could say, well, maybe if we're winding down on using this particular cooking ingredient, this gives us more room for a little bit more of a produce budget. But if we're planning for the week, we can repurpose this produce within 2 or 3 meals.
Yeah.
And they're going to be the experts to tell me that and to think. But I think going back to some of those leaders and saying, we would really like to do this, even if it's one day a week to start. We want to start highlighting, Mediterranean diet or brain diet infused foods, brain foods.
Yeah.
What are we recommending? And seeing what they can come up with already. And surprisingly, how little trade offs, much what we know is behavior change. I like to
Yeah.
think of that in the idea of your budget. Little trade offs can really free up a lot of new resources to support the programs you're doing, as well as another time where you're deciding, are we going to infuse this amount for an investment to start strong and, go even bigger? It's depending on operators, they might get donors. There might be people that are excited to invest in that or create a revenue for people wanting to buy healthier meals in comparison. I've seen operators doing this in different ways, but
Yeah.
I think it's being open to those conversations and hearing from your team where's some quick wins and trying them out and see what
Yeah.
happens.
Technology continues to drive changes in senior care, and that includes food service. eMenuChoice is an award-winning point-of-service application for managing the dining function in senior living communities. This mobile, touchscreen-enabled software enhances the dining experience for residents while streamlining processes for staff. The flexibility and functionality of eMenuChoice makes it an effective solution for any type of senior living environment, from independent and assisted living to skilled nursing facilities. It works for production kitchens or restaurant-style service with options for per meal or a la carte pricing, and accommodates a variety of payments, including bill to account, meal credits, and credit cards. Created by a senior care provider with more than a century of experience serving older adults, eMenuChoice eliminates communication barriers between staff and residents while enabling person-centered choices and greater resident satisfaction. eMenuChoice, transforming dining for senior living.
Yeah. I love what you said about like the simplicity of something like how colorful is the plate, right? Because when I would struggle talking to chefs about like, "Hey, how are we making the food look? How are you bringing extra nutrition?" And it was always like, "Well, they don't want those things." And surprisingly, what happens is when they add more color and more variety to the plate, well, it still gets consumed about the same. It's 'cause now it's visually appealing, but we also know that the nutrition behind it has improved. And, I like the idea of the quick win or the easy win. And so when you mentioned the mind diet, that's one that I've always kind of gravitated to because from a chef's perspective, there's a lot of flexibility in that because it doesn't say you have to do this very regimented thing. It's like, here's the ingredients, here's kind of the big ticket areas that you should focus on and work within those guardrails and those guidelines and see what you can do. And so I think, like you said, giving them that ability to pick that low hanging fruit, I think is huge. One thing that I always kind of I found odd was when I talk to operator, I see this happening in communities. It's memory care kind of always got this last place like approach to this, right? We're always looking at like either assisted living or independent living. Like these are places where we can do the brain health. We can implement that. But memory care isn't exactly the same. And I'm curious what you've seen, what your take is, and what maybe our opportunities are in memory care neighborhoods with brain health as opposed to maybe what we're doing in other places.
Yeah, I think it's one where we still have the opportunity. We have the purpose behind what we're doing, the intent to keep people hydrated, to give them good nutrition. The outcomes is sometimes different. So, on the nutrition side, I like to think of, and mind you, I'm going to bring this up the continuum, not end of life care,
Yeah.
but in there, but the concepts of, how are people getting access to meals? How are they
Mhm.
engaging? I've seen communities do very creative ways, but just still making the idea that nutrition they're consuming is what is driving their brains and their bodies. And so when we're having to work with people who have some type of neurological diseases, nutrition plays a crucial role. And unfortunately, for sometimes as we get down a continuum, despite if it's neurodegenerative disease or a brain based disease, we tend to think of, well, this is progressive.
Mm,
We don't need to pay attention to this area as much as we would, just like you said, on other areas where we're talking more proactive. But nutrition plays a huge role in our maintenance of our symptoms in what we're experiencing in the community. So I think to not negate the fact that nutrition's what's driving
yeah.
their energy. So it's going to impact the behavior, it's going to impact mood, social connections. So to think about and even take time to notice how people may be responding to some of those foods when we're seeing some behaviors and we're going back to those models of not being dismissive how quality nutrition can be helpful. And that may look different in memory care than the meal you're going to serve in independent living. But just
Mm,
like you said, our experts are going to know, our dietitians are going to be able to guide us.
yeah.
Again, this is more up the stage, not late stage, but still giving access to quality food and healthy items and experiences to eat with one another. There's so much that happens around that mealtime, but to make sure that we're giving people good nutrition that can fuel them, especially
Mm,
when they have brains that are having their own unique needs. They're not going to be able to work through as much or have as many resources to filter out some of the gunk we might get, for lack of better terms, from eating crappy foods
yeah.
because they might not be moving as much. They're not using up the energy and resources as much as someone that would be as active that can help offset. So to remember the role that we have to play in helping to keep that maintenance level and that good nutrition and hydration goes a long way.
Yeah. I think about like, a lot of times we tend to in memory care go to, well, what are the comfort foods, right? Those are the foods that people maybe would be more drawn to because they'll eat it more. But then I think about like some of the things that happen, right? Like I think about like the you get lethargic after a big heavy meal, or you get a little bit of brain fog because you've kind of overdone it with sugars or carbs or whatever. And I think, not an expert in this, but I would assume that we're talking about, okay, those are going to have maybe a little bit more dramatic effect on someone who's got some sort of cognitive issues than maybe someone, people like ourselves that don't have those issues yet. We can recognize them. We can kind of engage ourselves to do something, whereas somebody in a setting like memory care may not be able to act upon that. It's just another part of the confusion, perhaps, of how they're handling all of that.
And I think you alluded to the great part too of how this plays into the whole activity of the community.
Yeah.
What is happening and how we can be more intentional of when we're having activities that require more stimulation mentally or your body and movement, and then where you're purposely putting in times to rest. So the idea of more rest and digest after you eat rather
Mhm.
than thinking people are going to roll into an exercise program. I mean, our activities professionals know about this and in communities, but I think
Yeah.
being very mindful of, like you said, how this is this whole big picture and any diet you talk about, Mediterranean diet, mind diet, under brain health, it's not just the food. What
Mm,
sets those diets apart is there's a lifestyle component that involves movement and socialization, which I think pretty much describes our times in community settings, or even
yeah.
where if you bring that out, where staff is going, where we're going to congregate and talk and have those meals. So to remember all of this comes together around that food component. But I think the programming can beautifully complement that in some ways where we're being intentional of the time we need to digest and then getting people moving. And especially in memory care, it's a very different experience of your day. If you're going into the evening or in bed from a day that you've been bored,
Mm,
than a day that you've been properly stimulated and have good nutrition. And so those experiences are very different. Communities will recognize that as well, I'm
yeah.
sure. How it all comes together and can support people to live well.
Yeah. Kinda as we wrap up here, one of the things that I'd love for you to maybe share with some of your experiences, you've worked with operators implementing brain health programming and working with the chefs. What have been a couple of the challenges that you've seen that could maybe, by bringing them up and talking a little bit about them, can maybe help people start thinking about, well, how can I move past that? Or how can I go around that so that I can start really working towards implementing a food program that's got more brain health embedded in it?
One of the first things that comes to mind is I think when I was first tasked with implementing brain health and the company had adopted the Mediterranean diet, was understanding there was buy in
Mm,
from board members, from volunteers, from staff, and from leadership, and it wasn't. So when it came time to actually implement the Mediterranean diet and be serving these meals, I soon quickly learned the complaints came from staff, and we had to backpedal to educate about sugar in the brain,
mm,
why we were
yeah,
doing some of these healthier swaps of I was in the South. We weren't adding jimmies to the ice cream anymore. We were getting, the sprinkles were gone. We decided to get fresh fruits and berries and serve them on top. Residents, or I would say our students, they loved it. They would
yeah,
eat it. The volunteers are just like, why? And board members were like, well, why are we doing these things? So there's this like basic understanding of brain health is good for you, but I negated the fact of how much education and buy-in had to come from everyone. And I
yeah,
share that because volunteers were who were serving our meals. They're interacting with the residents in the
yeah,
room. And then we had staff. And if they fundamentally cannot understand or have the buy-in for what you're doing, it's very hard to implement. So they're saying, yes, we'll do this because corporate said or that we made the decision, we're doing the Mediterranean diet, but they're not really understanding the utility and its powerful tool. There was more pushback on creating the foods versus once we had everyone educated a little bit more, and this was now an opportunity for them. You should see
mm,
the dishes and the creativity that was then
yeah,
being put forward on the menu, or you know what, let's do this and sample out meals. So we still have the option we know people like, and let's make this an option and see if people happen to choose this to try to put more healthier options in. The creativity then came in these actual steps, but to realize there's a lot of stigma and barriers around this. And
mm,
even I thought, hey, they hired you, they recruited you, you're tasked to do this. You have the buy-in,
yeah,
and how quickly that can also derail. So it was about adjusting what progress and success would look like to realize we really had to get everyone educated so people understood about avoiding added sugars and the impact it can have on people who aren't moving as much or as active. And then that gave us great opportunities to then create the food. But I will say, keep an open mind, realize that there may be times to adjust and where
mm,
there's more education needed, but you'll get there. I think all teams can get there and leverage their expertise of the key players in the organization, because once they're there, the opportunities for them to thrive and flourish and give you beautiful meals is a whole different experience. So to create that opportunity, I think is a good place to start.
yeah. No, that's I think, a great way to kind of pull all this together and look at that as it's an opportunity to not only serve our residents better, but to maybe even set yourself and your community and your food and community program apart from the competition. So, um, how can the listeners connect with you, Krystal, learn more about the Virtual Brain Health Center, and kind of maybe engage in this process that we've been talking about here for the last 20 minutes or so.
We did our best to be easy to find. We're at virtualbrainhealthcenter.com. You can find some of the free programs and events, and then we work with other people wanting to implement brain health programs on their community needs as contractors. So excited to see where brain health is going to go for senior living.
No, totally agree. And it's been a great conversation. So, Krystal, thanks so much for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Thank you for having me.
So, there it is, everybody. Another one in the books. Thanks again for tuning in. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestlehospitalityconcepts.com. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.